When Björn Ulvaeus penned The Winner Takes It All in 1980, he wrote with all his heart. But what people don't know is the ruthless twist that followed, when he asked his ex-wife Agnetha to sing these heartbreaking words about their broken marriage. And she said it was one of the most difficult moments of her life, standing in that recording studio, singing her ex-husband's words of heartbreak and loss. But this was not the most tragic part of their tale, because the real horror occurred years earlier. And Björn kept quiet until today. Björn Ulvaeus was born on April 25, 1945 in Gothenburg, Sweden, at the conclusion of World War II, and his parents, A.A. and Eric, had a humble lifestyle, with Eric laboring in a paper mill, their apartment tiny with communal toilets, and Sweden rationed until 1951. Despite this, Björn was singing tune-filled melodies by age 5, and even though he didn't have much, he listened intently to radio songs and recited every melody. Sweden's economy was growing fast, yet many families like his still struggled, and Gothenburg was full of shipyards and heavy work, shaping how young Björn saw the world, and he learned early what effort meant. In 1951, when Björn was 6, they relocated to a peaceful coastal village named Fairytale, away from large cities, with extremely cold winters where everything crawled. But something altered in 1956 when Björn received a little guitar from his cousin that Christmas. He was just 11, but he practiced for hours learning by ear songs he listened to on the radio, enjoying the raw sound of skiffle music, particularly after he first heard Rock Island Line in 1955, and at night he would be sitting in his room, plucking strings and dreaming. Västervik had a population of only 20,000, but those endless, silent nights made him fall in love with music, and in 1957, at the age of 12, he constructed his own amplifier out of spare parts, demonstrating that he wasn't merely playing, he was creating. School, however, was tough. About 1952, he attended the local grammar school, and the taunting began because Björn wasn't a sports enthusiast like most boys. While others were playing soccer, he was listening to Elvis, and shyness and quietness made him a target. So, by the time he was 10, he was enjoying smuggled American rock records. Sweden hardly had record players, with a mere 15% of households owning one, but Björn managed to hear, and Rock Around the Clock filled his ears as classmates taunted him, and the more they teased, the further he retreated into music, even listening to Radio Luxembourg late at night, undercover. By 1957, he was already secretly beginning to put together music groups and was performing at local festivals by 1958, and behind the Hurt Something was building powerful. In 1957, Björn and his mates began a small band, playing skiffle and folk songs such as Tom Dolly and playing at church functions and town fetes, but he was appalled at being on stage. During one of the early shows in 1958, he forgot the words, the audience laughed, and he couldn't breathe, with panic attacks so severe they plague him even to the years of ABBA fame later on, and admitted once he used beta blockers during a buzz in the 70s to quiet his nerves. Nevertheless, he persisted, rehearsing in a garage for hours each day. And in 1960, they even won a local competition and received 50 kroner, which was a remarkable experience for a boy who had cried after school. Then came the day that turned everything around. In 1963, at age 18, Björn joined the West-based Singers after winning a national radio competition, and that same year they renamed themselves the Hootenanny Singers and concentrated on Swedish folk music rather than the British pop craze engulfing everything. They sang a tune entitled Jag Vinnervidma on a television program viewed by millions on October 26, 1963, which was their first major break. In 1964, they were signed to Polar Music, and Björn was traveling around Sweden in a broken-down van and playing 168 gigs that summer in open fields and parks. Their record, also titled Hootenanny Singers, performed well despite being up against the Beatles and Stones, and singing in Swedish instead of English kept them unique. It was then that Björn encountered Benny Andersson, the man who would transform his life, but while the music was expanding, Björn was attempting to study law and business at Lund University and enrolled in 1964, the same year their album was released. He hardly went to class, and in 1966, he was on academic probation, as he was constantly on the road playing small towns for 500 kroner a show, living two lives, one in the lecture halls, the other on smoke-filled stages, and later confessed he has little recollection of this time due to a memory condition uncovered in 2009. Nonetheless, this crazy time bore fruit in having created his first major hit. In 1966, their Gabrielle, a Russian tune arranged into a song, rose to number 1 in Sweden, remaining on Svängtoppen for weeks and reaching number 5 on Keltoen, but creating controversy when Russian press accused them of stealing the song. Despite this, it was also released in 6 languages, among them German and Finnish, and although it failed to chart abroad, Björn was now a familiar name in Sweden. He and Benny Andersson began writing songs together during the same year, and their first effort, Isn't It Easy to Say, was recorded by the Heap Stars but did not reach Eurovision in 1969, but something significant had been initiated. Björn and Benny composed together all the time, and in 1968 they came up with Luvis Sexidal, a saucy tune about the 60s that was sung by Brea Borg, frequently composing while on the go, sometimes even in cars on long drives. Björn described their musical chemistry as love at first sight, and in 1969 they started, recording their debut album as a duo. They titled it Leah, meaning happiness, and it was released in November 1970. Björn sang nearly every song. It was intensely personal, heavy on acoustic guitar, and it foreshadowed the pop sound they later mastered with ABBA. They sold only 10,000 copies, but something was changing. In the summer of 1969, Björn encountered Agnetha Fältskog during a cafe visit while touring. She was 19, already well known for her hit single Jägersvar in 1967. Björn was 24 and was attracted to her right away. They duet on a song entitled To Live With You, their voices complementing each other naturally. She recently broke off an engagement to a German producer, which also made headlines. Before long, they were inseparable. They were married on the 6th of July, 1971, in a small church in Virum. Benny played the organ. They had their daughter Linda in 1973. Their son Peter was born in 1977. After their divorce in 1979, their music still told their story. The Winner Takes It All wasn't merely a song. It was an ado. In 1970, the 4 future ABBA members went on a free holiday to Cyprus. Björn, Benny, Agnetha, and Frida stayed at the Twyga Tower Hotel and did a brief show for UN troops. They sang Swedish folk songs. It was the first time all 4 of them were on stage together. The 4 of them hit it off, but their star was anything but glamorous. They didn't even go by the name ABBA then. The group name was a mouthful as well. Björn and Benny, Agnetha, and Annie Freirid. And their first single, People Need Love, was released in June 1972. In Sweden, it did all right, selling about 50,000 copies and reaching number 17 on the Swedish charts. But elsewhere, the song sank without a trace. UK and US radio stations ignored it entirely. Their critics mocked their music, claiming the harmonies sounded too rough, the production too homemade, and the atmosphere too Euro. At one point, it seemed the dream was dashed before it even began. They were playing solo gigs just to make ends meet. Björn would later confess that the rejection stung, but rather than give up, they redoubled. That disappointment in 1972 was the prod they needed to refine every note, every word, every aspect. By 1973, Björn was insisting on a name change. The long band name did not linger in people's memory, and he came up with something plain. ABBA. It was simply their initials spelled out into a tidy little palindrome. Agnetha, Björn, Benny, Annie Freirid. But in Sweden, that name was already used by a company of canned fish, which was established way back in 1838. People scoffed. A pop group named after herring. It was like a joke. The company of fish was not enthusiastic about it either. They consented to let the band use it, but only on the condition that they would not embarrass them. Newspapers conducted contests in which the name was voted on by fans, with some jesting that it sounded like fishy music. Swedish media wasn't being nice either. Some criticized it as sounding gimmicky, even absurd. But Björn stood firm. He paid no attention to the ridicule, acquired the trademark, and what had sounded silly in 1973 went on to become one of the most recognizable names in musical history. That year, tensions erupted within the studio while recording Ring Ring. The sessions began on January 10th at Metronome Studio in Stockholm. Production was taken over by Björn, experimenting with something new. He envisioned the layering of sounds like Phil Spector's wall of sound, tape speed stunts, multiple overdubs, raw textures that no one in Sweden had attempted. But the manager, Stig Andersson, disapproved. He demanded clean, sleek hits, not sound experiments. Their disagreements became so argumentative and heated that Stig once walked out of the studio, angry that Björn had refused his lyrics, calling them too pretentious. At one time, Björn threatened to leave if he weren't granted artistic control. The entire project came close to collapsing. However, when Ring Ring was eventually released, it reached #1 in Sweden and sold 100,000 copies. It was not a worldwide success, but it demonstrated that something was right. Nevertheless, the world beyond wasn't convinced. In the spring of 1973, Björn traveled to London with demo tapes in his pocket. He knocked on the doors of over 10 labels, Decca, EMI, Polyer, PIWA, and offered them Ring Ring. Most executives smiled courteously, then informed him it was too European, too dainty, too tacky. One actually laughed in his face and said that this type of music would never be sold outside Scandinavia. No single deal came about. Björn made the long trip back to Sweden discouraged, penniless, and doubting everything. They were merely scraping by with gigs locally, earning them only 5,000 kroner per show. The accents, the costumes, the bright melodies, all of it was regarded as an albatross. One small success did materialize in Australia, where Ring Ring made it to #32 in October. It was not much, but kept the flame burning. And then April 6th, 1974, Eurovision Song Contest in Brighton. The day everything changed. They sang Waterloo dressed in glittering finery with Björn holding a silver star-shaped guitar which glinted in the stage lights. There was even a last-minute fright. Sweden's conductor appeared dressed as Napoleon in a costume which nearly broke down on stage, but nothing could dampen the energy. They took top spot with 24 points, 6 more than the UK's Olivia Newton-John. It was Sweden's first Eurovision win, and it made ABBA overnight world stars. Interestingly, that silver guitar disappeared after the performance and was never seen again. It is said to be worth millions of dollars now. In 1975, they were constantly touring on the road, touring across Scandinavia, performing in outdoor parks, even in inclement weather. Fans became absolutely wild. In Australia, SOS dominated the charts for 7 consecutive weeks, selling 500,000 copies. Mamma Mia was even larger, reaching 1 million by year's end. But fame had a price. In Sydney, people breached hotel lobbies. Agnetha, desperate to escape stalkers and threats, barricaded herself in a room. Her stress level skyrocketed. The pressure nearly destroyed her. That same year, Björn brokered their first real breakthrough in the U.S. Atlantic Records signed them in May of 1976 after Waterloo impressed the label's president. The U.S. was not kind. Radio stations still believed their sound too bubblegum. But Dancing Queen, released in 1976, did turn things around. It was their sole #1 hit in America and reached the top of the charts in 15 countries. Frida cried when she first heard the song. It was that lovely. They tracked it with Moog synthesizers and stacked 100 hours of overdubs. It almost exhausted them. The album Arrival was released in October and sold 1 million records in its first week. They released the album in 1977 featuring songs such as The Name of the Game, which Björn wrote after therapy. He used his actual emotional turmoil to craft the lyrics, exposing vulnerability ABBA never had before. They even produced a mini musical called The Girl with the Golden Hair while they were on tour with Agnetha and Frida sporting blonde wigs.